Right, so to the subject of tonight's talk, it's Susan Major of Clements Hall Local History Group. I'm quite a fan of Clements Hall because I grew up in that part of York, but they've been very, very industrious in the large number of publications in the last 5 to 6 years, and also have expanded to absorb Bishop Hill Local History Group. So they now cover, if you like, that whole section to the left-hand side of the Ouse, all the way across to the city walls and Bishopthorpe Road. So it's quite a big patch now, a patch that's now largely belaned with these lovely scoria bricks. And I've got one on there. I can't wait to get my hands on it. So without further ado, she will obviously take some questions at the end, hopefully. And those on Zoom, clearly, if you have any questions, just put them on the chat on Zoom, as you may have done before. So I'll leave you in the capable hands of Susan Major. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. First of all, can you make sure you can all hear me? If you can't, just give me a shout. When I first started thinking about these scoria bricks, and they are important because they played quite a big part in people's everyday lives, but I wrote about the scoria bricks in the alleyways of York, and I got a lot of stick for that because people said they weren't alleyways, but there's lots of debate as to what they are. People call them back lanes, they call them back alleys, they call them ginnels, they call them snickets. I don't know what you call them, for instance. Back lane. Is there a consensus around back lanes, or do you call them back alleys? Or well, I'm just thinking about York for the moment. But anyway, yes. So I've used back alleys for the title of this talk. So it's actually about these. And feel free, when I finish, to come and have a look at these. They're very heavy. That weighs 10 pounds, about 4.5 kilos, so they're quite substantial. They're scoria bricks, they're not sets, and they're not cobbles, and people get sort of confused about the naming of these. And I noticed in one document that the council called them sets, and they're definitely not sets. Sets are rectangular, made out of granite that's been quarried, and cobbles are usually smaller and more rounded. Sometimes people call them block paviers or stable paviers because they're used in stables. So there's different names for them, but as far as I'm concerned, they're scoria bricks, and that's their official name. And I'll go on to talk about why they're called scoria bricks. It's something that most of us probably take for granted because they're so familiar. I've only been in York for about 30 years, but those of you who've grown up in York, it's a very familiar surface for the back alleys. They're very silvery grey blue tiles. In South Bank, for instance, there's tons of them. They're long stretches behind our terraced houses, and they have a very distinctive glazed finish. And I've never really given these bricks much of a thought, but a couple of years ago in June, we had a display at the Bishop Road Street Party. Although it was June, I think Catherine was there as well. It was very cold, very wet, and very windy, so much so that we had to actually anchor our bits of paper down with rocks because they were just flying away. But one thing that happened is a gentleman who was fascinated by our photographs of the area came up to me and said, "Do you know what those alleyway bricks are called?" And I said, "I didn't." And he says, "They're scoria bricks." And he was from Darlington, he was a visitor. And he started to tell me all about them. I thought, well, I don't know anything about these. So after that, I decided to try and find out a bit more about them. Right. Oh, has that gone off? I might have done. But no. There we are. That's what you've got on here. A lot of ours are double hexagons, but I'll go on to talk about the shapes in a minute. But that's one of our alleyways. That's a lovely picture from Sue Gabbatis, and I decided to ask her to use her picture because it was so lovely. I'm afraid our alleyways don't look much like that at the moment because they're full of weeds because of council cuts, etc., and they tend to get dug up as well. People had different names. I don't know whether you had other names for these bricks. Some people call them threepenny bits. They call them eights or figures of 8. I don't know whether those names were names that you used or not. And they weren't all that shape, but an awful lot of them are. And I can guarantee after this talk, you'll take far more notice of them wherever you are. In our area, there's a very distinctive back alley. Sorry, yeah, they're also in gutters. That's Queen Victoria Street. I think I've missed one. That's it. On the left-hand side, that's between Lawn Street and the bottom of Countberg Terrace. And I love those because they're square and they're bright blue and they make me think of a Turkish bath. So they're some of my favourite ones, really. But there are lots of very standard ones, and you can see those there in our area around Scarcroft Road. Those are, and also Blossom Street. But they're also in other parts of every part of York. Here we have Burtonston Lane, Haxby Road, the Groves. And you can see, particularly if it's sometimes I get these pictures from Street View, sometimes I've taken them, and just at the moment a lot of them are very weedy. Then you've got some narrow alleyways. There's tons around Holgate, of course. Yeah, those are all Holgate, and those are quite narrow alleyways, but they've got the bricks leading all the way down with weeds at each side. Looks like a garden, actually. And then you've got Heworth, 2nd Avenue in Heworth. The ones on the right-hand side are Main Street in Fulford, and I don't know if anybody is from Fulford, but they look as if they've been laid relatively recently. To me, they look like, I think they are scoria bricks, but they're not old scoria bricks. They're sort of, I don't know whether somebody decided it would be a good idea to get hold of some scoria bricks and put them there. They don't look very old. Now, this one's interesting. This is in Acomb. Does anybody recognise where we are in Acomb? Yes, yes. And I don't know why. It seems to me that the council put that in relatively recently.
Yeah, we're right there.
Yeah. So where did it?
Big what's name?
So that's why the.
And it's come all over.
Yeah. Oh.
And did it right up front and saved them.
Yeah.
Did all the groundwork in the road, well, we said it's a road, and then
So were the scoria already there, or were they?
They're
right.
They've been reused.
Because normally you don't get them at the end of the road, you get them in the back alleys or you get them in the gutters. And so it's quite unusual to have them.
Council have a huge stuff.
Well, they told me they didn't have any.
They haven't They got skipped forward.
Need to talk to you about this because I deliberately made inquiries and they said they haven't got any.
I also know where I was where there's a skipyard at Sutton on Forest.
And has that got loads in?
And they've got, yeah, they used to get them in from the council. And the skipyard owner used to just put most of them on side. And there's a big pile as high as that wall, sort of thing.
Need to talk to you afterwards.
Yeah.
Right. People do have fond memories. They learned to ride their bikes on these back alleys and they played marbles. Apparently they weren't so successful for roller skating and they could be a bit slippery when it was icy. But we've talked about York. I mean, they're obviously all over York, but it's not just York, of course, because it's linked to iron works. We're talking about the northeast generally. So there's some in Saltburn and those are the same shape as ours. And then there's some in Darlington. Now, I did actually use Street View for this. So the ones in Darlington that I found on Street View are actually rectangular rather than our shape, but there's probably some differently shaped ones if I were to go along there. One very interesting thing, and I'm sure you'll be the same, we went to Whitby just before Christmas, I think. And I was walking up the road towards the Abbey and lo and behold, they have scoria bricks lining the roadway and they look beautifully blue. They're rectangular, but they're beautifully blue. And I imagine they've been put in when they redid the road. They're not original ones. But again, I think what you'll find is when you're out and about, you'll notice these things now. I've talked about scoria bricks. Scoria is an actual ancient Greek word. It actually means excrement or dung, basically. But the Romans used it for the lava that came out of the hot lava that came out of volcanoes. And the reason they're called scoria bricks, because they're constructed out of the refuse left when iron is smelted. So we'll go back to that. And the story of these bricks starts in the mid-19th century. Since I had the conversation with the chappie from Darlington 2 years ago, I've actually tried to find out as much as possible about this fascinating story. So I'm going to talk more about the bricks and how they're constructed, but also about the chap who was behind them in the first place. But what I found, as much as I find out, there's always unanswered questions, so it leads to lots of different avenues, and your response is very interesting. So the story starts in the blast furnaces in Cleveland in the northeast. There's a sample picture of an ironworks in 1853. That's Bell Brothers Ironworks, so that's just setting the scene. At this point, the ironworks would have been producing pig iron from ore deposits in rock, and pig iron is a very crude iron used to produce steel and other things. Do we know why it's called pig iron?
Where it was laid in the floor, and yeah, it ran off like little piglets.
That's right, exactly. Yeah. What happened was when hot metal was cast, the liquid iron would come from the furnace and it would be poured into a trench, and then it would flow into smaller trenches, and it just looked like a sow with piglets, and that's why it was called pig iron. And the thing about all this pig iron that was being produced at this time was it actually generated millions of tons of slag waste at the bottom of the blast furnaces, and it was a real problem for the iron masters because it was very expensive to remove. It was often tipped on waste ground or to reclaim marsh, and there were plans to take it out to sea, but it was a real problem. It was used, basic slag was used as a fertilizer in fields, even in the 1950s, because it contained lime and released phosphates when buried. And there were lots of attempts to make slag cement and slag building bricks and slag wool for insulation. And now it's actually used as a building aggregate. When I was exploring this topic, I came across what I would regard as the definitive paper on scoria bricks, written by a gentleman called Charles Morris, who was an industrial archaeologist in Cleveland. And he wrote this paper in 1981. That's it. And it's very good because it tells me lots of things. And since it's still around, and we've had quite a few email conversations to clarify things. But one of the things he does in this paper is he carried out an analysis, and he tells me that the chemical constituents of scoria are lime, silica, alumina, magnesia, sulfur, calcium sulfide, iron, potash, soda, and manganese. And it's actually the manganese that tends to give it the sort of slightly blue colour. Sometimes it's very blue, as the ones on Cattenberg Terrace. Sometimes it's just vaguely blue. Now, one thing that really is very interesting as far as I'm concerned, when I gave this talk in September at Clements Hall, there was a lot of interest, and I got a lot of really useful feedback from the audience, which I was able then to put into my next talk. And in fact, one of the ladies, it was a really good story, that she was from Consett in County Durham, and she said, had I heard about the Battle of the Blue Heaps? I don't know if anybody's heard of these at all. Ironworks in the Consett area left a load of slag heaps which were blue, and they were known as the Blue Heaps. And apparently round about, I think it was 1847, there was a huge standoff between the Irish Catholic migrant workers and the English workers. And they had to send in the soldiers to try and sort of stop this. And it was a famous battle, and it was called the Battle of the Blue Heaps. So it's a fascinating addition to the story of slag. I think I've got I did have a look. Yeah, I did find a picture of the slag heaps at the Crook Hall. The important thing is they've now been landscaped. It's now a lovely country park. We've talked about iron smelting, but other kinds of there are other byproducts of other smelting processes. It might involve copper, zinc, brass, nickel, and there's also slag glass, which is another byproduct high in silica, but we're talking about iron really. But it was a very smart Victorian idea to actually make these lovely shiny silvery blue bricks to use as a road or alleyway surface. The qualities were superb, and I'll say a bit more about those. And lots of people had already tried that, but they hadn't quite got it right, because you had to have the slag from the furnace straight away. You had to be able to shape it into these uniform bricks, and you had to cool it very slowly, because if you didn't, it wouldn't form properly and it would crack. And it seems that a gentleman called Joseph Woodward of Darlington was the one who found the solution in the 1860s. So I'll say a little bit about him. I'm afraid I can't give you a photograph, so that's just a mock photograph of Joseph Woodward. He is an important part of our story. And his process that he invented involved molten slag being tapped from the bottom of the blast furnace and transported in bogies or trucks along the railway line to the kiln. We do have a very helpful plan here from much later. This one was it 1894, where you can see at the top the blast furnaces, you can see the railway lines, and you can see the kilns at the bottom. Now, Woodward's patented invention was a revolving table with moulds. You can see it in his application for a patent, in an American patent in 1877. He did apply for a patent, get a patent apparently in 1869, a British one, and I have not yet been able to find that one. So that's a bit of a mystery really. But the idea was he created this table where the molten slag would be tapped off the bottom of the blast furnaces, transferred to this table, put into moulds, and then it would gradually revolve around till it got to the other end, and a latch would drop, and then it would go into an annealing. At the right moment, it would go into, it would then go onto a conveyor belt. An attendant would put it on a conveyor belt, and it would go to a kiln where the kiln was heated, but then it had to be in the kiln for 3 days until it was ready to use. It had to cool very steadily in order to remove internal stresses and make it easy to work. Had to be very carefully managed, and a lot of people had tried this sort of thing but hadn't been able to do it to avoid cracking. So we ended up with this thing called scoria bricks. It's a kind of basalt, and it's an igneous rock, which means it was formed from magma or lava. And the thing about these bricks is they're very, very hard to break, very substantial, very durable, completely waterproof, frostproof, and indeed chemical proof, so much that they apparently proved very useful at the chemical works drainage channels at ICI Billingham in the 1920s. They were very useful for that. They were also known as stable bricks because they were used in stables. But apparently they did have some very, I've not seen any demonstrations of this, but they have some memorable characteristics. Apparently, if you try and heat them around a fire, they explode shockingly. And they do smell of sulphur or rotten eggs if spilt because of the constituents. People remember the sort of echoey ring. Previously to the use of these bricks, the road makers had used whinstone sets. That was after they'd replaced cobbles. But scoria bricks were cheap, easy to lay because they were very regular, and they were identical in size. So they could be laid flat on a roadway on a 6-inch bed of sand and rammed down by a team of men with heavy wooden rammers. So Joseph took his patent out in 1869, which I haven't been able to find, and he opened the Tees Scoria Brick Company at Clay Lane Blast Furnace in Eston, Middlesbrough in 1872. We do have an advert there from 1873 where he was actually advertising for ironmasters to allow him to make his bricks at their works. He was totally dependent on them. He couldn't just make them anywhere. He had to be there getting the slag from the bottom of a furnace. There was a note that somebody else seemed to have invented some sort of machine but abandoned it. But Woodward is definitely the one who pursued this all and took out eventually an American patent. And we do have the record of that in 1877. He was very keen to demonstrate his invention. He exhibited at the Yorkshire Show at Northallerton in 1873, where he paved an area suitable for stables. And then in 1875, he was at the Ripon Agricultural Show, proudly announcing that Darlington Corporation had trialled his bricks successfully for 2 years in one of their main streets. He opened factories at Acklem in Middlesbrough and Lackenby at Redcar, next to the blast furnaces. And they later expanded their location at the Cargo Fleet Ironworks at South Bank in Middlesbrough. And they seem to have the monopoly for Cleveland scoria bricks. This is a picture from much later. This particular one is 1893, when the Institution of Mechanical Engineers visited the ironworks. And they described a slightly different process. On the left, you can see what looks like a children's roundabout. And that has lots of moulds in it. It would turn around. And when it got so far around, the chaps would take the bricks and carry them over to the kiln, which are on the right. It was like a roundabout with wire stays, and it was apparently fitted with 140 moulds. So they're in several layers. And there were 18 kilns, each holding 1,000 bricks. But this was long after Woodward had moved away and died. I did find an angry letter in the York Herald in 1875 from Joseph Woodward. He was outraged that his bricks had been dismissed as a failure in the paper by somebody called Luckenbach, who was a New York critic, but he was also a competitor. And he was annoyed because his bricks had been successfully used all over the north of England. But I did have a conversation with the archaeologist Charles Morris about this. He was the one who wrote this paper in 1981. And he felt the problem was that American ironwork slag had a different composition to the British slag, and it was more brittle. And that's why they ended up with a different quality of scoria brick. But huge quantities of scoria bricks were manufactured on Teesside and used, for example, in the approaches to the new railway station at York. And I have yet to find a picture of that. So if anybody has any ideas about that, and because that opened in 1877, they were also used at Edinburgh. Many were exported to Canada and the West Indies, as well as Holland, Belgium, the US, South America, and Africa. They've gone all over, basically. Following my last talk, colleague, who I don't think is here, Don Baldison, sent me these pictures from Thirsk Station, and you can see they line the approaches at Thirsk Station. And what I'm very jealous of is they actually have them that say T Scoria Bricks patent. So it would be wonderful if I could find one of those in York, but I do look, but no. And then Charles Morris included this diagram in his paper. And obviously ours looks like number 7 in that. And we looked at number 7 and thought, well, they don't quite look the same as our bricks, because his number 7 has a sort of bridging piece in the middle, whereas ours interlock. And when I mentioned that to him, he realized he'd made a mistake. and I was the first one to point it out. So he was very apologetic about that. It's not clear when our alleyways were paved. I did notice, and I think this was in a press report, there's probably a job to be done, and it's not me at the moment because I've got too much on, to go through all the council minutes in the York Explorer archives and try and find out more about the purchasing of these bricks by York Council. But there was a press report in 1884. York Council's Urban Sanitary Committee accepted a tender from the Scoria company for the supply of slag bricks at £8, 2 shillings and 6p per thousand. So it looks like certainly at that point, the 1880s, they were using those slag bricks in our alleyways at the time when a lot of our terraced housing was being built. But yeah, I suspect there's more evidence in the streets and whatever committee minutes, which I haven't had time to do anything with. There were problems with producing these bricks. It depended entirely on the ironworks being up and running, and if they stopped production, then you couldn't produce the bricks. But eventually the motor car destroyed the business. And when it replaced metal rimmed carriages, as people wanted a smoother ride, and tarmac followed in the 1930s. And then steel and iron making ran down, and by 1966, the company went bankrupt, to be wound up in 1972. I did find on the council website a report from 2004. The council produced a report about their resurfacing policy on back lanes, referring to the bricks rather mysteriously as rosemary sets. And I mean, they're not sets, and where the rosemary comes from, I don't know. Apparently, York has around 16 miles or 25 kilometres of back lanes, a third of which use scoria bricks. These were tougher in withstanding bin lorries and freezing temperatures than paving or tarmac. You can see what a mess tarmac patching. That one's Lehman Road. It's unfortunate, really. There's lots of excavation for utilities and street lighting. And I was told by the council they didn't have any replacements. I did find a heritage statement for Darlington, which celebrated their scoria bricks. And I thought, why doesn't York celebrate its scoria bricks? It doesn't really properly mention them in their characterisation statements for each area. And certainly in this report, it calls them rosemary sets. So I think York should think about what they mean to people and the fact they're part of our heritage. I did speak to somebody who told me she used to work for utility companies, and she said that when they were working on alleyways, they tried to keep them intact, but it was difficult in emergencies. And they preferred to move them away from the site when working, or otherwise they disappeared. So we're going to take a detour now and find out a bit more about Joseph Woodward, because I wanted to know where he got his ideas from and what happened to him. And the more I found out, the more I realised I didn't know. So it's quite intriguing. And it illustrated aspects of Victorian industrial invention, but also a very interesting exercise in family history research. And it raised as many questions as it answered. So we're back to the mysterious gentleman. Difficult to pin details down as he moved around a great deal. But it appears from later records that he was the baby baptised in Little Ousburn in North Yorkshire, which we're probably familiar with near Boroughbridge, in 1824. He was recorded as the illegitimate son of Hannah Woodward, and his reputed father was James Roberts. It's such a common name, it's difficult to track him. But from such difficult beginnings, Joseph rose to become a gentleman, but interestingly retained his mother's name. I haven't really been able to track him down in the 1841 census properly, because it's such a common name and it could be one of a few people. But I do know that in 1840 and 1841, when he must only have been 16 or 17, Joseph Woodward was displaying inventions that he'd manufactured at local agricultural shows, such as at Wetherby, a barley humbler for breaking up barley, a 13-coultered Suffolk corn drill, the coulters are the knives, and a winnowing machine to separate the grains from the chaff. So it was obviously an interest. He was interested in agriculture and interested in inventing things. So, you know, that's him. But I was able then to find him in the 1851 and 1861 censuses. Little Oosburn, as you're probably aware, is a very small village with a population of less than 300 in 1820. So we must assume that future references with the correct birth date and village are the same Joseph Woodward. Before I show you the 1851 census, there's a map there where I've put various places that he was associated with in the sort of earlier days. He did move around quite a lot. And then this is interesting again. This is where, whether you can see that, this is where I found him in the 1851 census in Keighley, about 35 miles away from Little Oosburn. It's very interesting on various counts. He was enumerated as visiting the household of Jonas Sugden in Keighley. Now, Jonas Sugden was a very rich and powerful industrialist with almost 1,000 hands in his factory. There's quite a lot about him in literature. So why was Joseph Woodward there at the age of 27? Even more, it says he's married, and I can't find his marriage. Another interesting factor is that he's described as a Methodist preacher, a role which he would have carried out alongside another job. But his host, Jonas, was a staunch Wesleyan and a local preacher in the Keighley circuit. So Joseph's role in the household may not have been surprising, but it's not clear how he got there. And I think there's all sorts of questions about Methodist networks, a lot more to be found out. It's very surprising. So that was what he was doing in 1851. And then in the next census, which is 1861, he's a farmer in Staffordshire, which is strange, but it's still the same chap. He has 147 acres, which seems quite a big place to me. And it is there with his wife, Eliza, from Leeds, and his daughter. But the next year he went bankrupt. And there was a lot of moving around. So that's the sort of background to Joseph, who invented the process. I'm now going to say a little bit more about what happened with Darlington, etc. Certainly by the late 1860s, Joseph and his wife Eliza had moved to the northeast of Darlington, and he made the patent. He took out the patent for his device for improvements in the manufacture of bricks, tiles, slabs, or blocks for building purposes. But it's not clear how he got involved with that, because he would have had to be closely working with ironmasters, because you can't practice unless you've got the slag to practice with. In the 1871 census, he was recorded as a grease manufacturer, employing one man. Now, if you can imagine, 19th century, a lot of industrial machinery and railways, they all need lubrication. So it was an important thing. So he was there in Darlington in 1871 with his wife, but sadly she died soon after, age 42. But she appears to have been the first of his several wives. He didn't wait long, because the following year he married Sarah Dennison in 1872. She was about the same age, and by now he was described as a merchant. So he had a very varied history of trades. This was the company around that time, the Tees Scoria Brick Company, and this is his advert, wanting to persuade ironmasters in the area to let him use their slag. And in many cases, they would have been only too happy, because they had wanted to get rid of it. And they were looking for investment. The company, they estimated 280,000 bricks a week and a profit of 8,000 a year. And he was working with Mr. Wood, the engineer of the Tees Ironworks in Middlesbrough, and Thomas Vaughan of Clay Lane Works. And they were both, there are notes in the press about the fact they were both working with him and trying to reduce the weight of the bricks produced. I don't know whether that's meant to be a lighter one or not. And by now his bricks were being used in Middlesbrough, Stockton, and by some large brewing and malting firms. And reporters noticed the durability of the bricks and that they were impervious to water and frost. And the fact that everyone was similar, so they were much easier to lay and to use. And around this time, he took the American patent. And then we've also got a map showing various Midlands locations that he was associated with. Spreading his operations, in 1876, he installed a processing plant at Turley's blast furnace in Tipton in Staffordshire, which is interesting because if you remember, he was a farmer in Staffordshire, so he seems to have used his experience there. It's about 35 miles away from where he was before. But then the next stage was he moved to the Midlands to live at Milverton, Warwick, and he set up the Midland Molten Ironstone Company in 1879 to operate his process in Staffordshire and Warwickshire. And that's where he would have been advertising for ironmasters in those areas to let him use their slag, basically, to make his bricks. He was a very busy chap. He was director of a tramway project in Liverpool and Warwick. And that was, it was 1881. It was originally a horse-drawn tram, but later became electric. It lasted till 1930, so it was reasonably successful. But by early 1880, his second wife, Sarah, died. He was living in Leamington Spa. That year, he was described as a retired brewer. And that's a bit weird, really, but I managed to solve that because a clue appears to his brewing activity in 1886 in a legal case brought against him by the recovery of some title deeds used by him to raise money for the South Durham Brewery Company. So he just seems to have been an inventor, an industrialist, an entrepreneur with a finger in lots of different pies. Right, so eyes on the time. Despite losing 2 wives in the last decade, he decided to remarry quickly, a disastrous decision. In 1883, he married Annie McIntyre, a widow in Harrogate. He was actually living in Leamington. I haven't found out why they got married in Harrogate. She appears to be quite a rich widow who was also marrying for the 3rd time. And this eventually was to lead to some very lurid press reports. This is just a snippet of, there's tons about it in the press. By 1886, he was living in Stretton-on-Dunsmuir and Dunsmore in Warwickshire, and he appeared in a lengthy and lurid press account about his divorce from Annie after 3 years, headed the retired brewer and his wife's doctor. He was actually awarded £200 damages from the correspondent, Dr. Charles Oakes. And apparently it was Dr. Oakes that had introduced Annie to him in Leamington as a widow lady with means. So I think she was probably after his money and he was after hers. So I don't know. Apparently Dr. Oakes gave her away at their Harrogate wedding and they lived happily for a while. But the following year, he opened her desk and found some letters written to her by a gentleman before her marriage. She was in London at the time and he telegraphed her about it. And they also had a slight difference as to how her money was to be applied. So as a result, after returning home, she left him, taking a servant and her boy by her first marriage, and moved to live with Dr. Oakes, first at Blackpool and then in Acton in London. So that's quite an interesting diversion. He finally died aged 62 at Stretton-on-Dunsmuir in 1888 and was buried there. But once again, with Joseph, there was a little quirk right at the end. Around that time, there was a case involving a claim for goods against him by a Liverpool man, J. Williams. After the claim was served, Joseph died, so there was much procedural argument, which was quite amusing. The plaintiff's solicitor argued that there was no formal notice of his death, but the judge responded that a man could not give notice of his own death, and that also he could not give judgment against a dead man. This was all reported in the press. So, the inventor of the process for making our back alley bricks was a surprising self-made man who moved around a lot and had a finger in many pies. There's still much to be explored, as you can see, by all the gaps in this. And I'm particularly intrigued by the role of Methodist networks and how he ended up living with a very wealthy industrialist and presumably learning some tricks from him. Two things now. Those bricks can be found in Beamish Open Air Museum. I was hoping they would be able to send me some pictures, but they haven't done yet. But are you going? Yeah. If you see some, please take some pictures. Apparently they've laid them there. But I don't know how much you're aware of this, but there's various artworks that bricks have inspired. You know about these. This is the back of the Centre for Ceramic Art at the Art Gallery. I took that last week or the week before, and the shape of the scoria bricks. It's lovely. They were fitted in 2015, and then there's another. Don't know a great deal about this, but there was a sculptor called Jo Lathwood. She featured the bricks in a special performance at the Darlington Head of Steam Museum. It was called Volcanoes and Scoria Bricks, and that was in 2021. And then closer to home, and in fact, we were able to display this at our, when I gave the talk in September at Clements Hall. One of our members, Heather Daw, long time ago, did an art course at York St John, and she was so inspired by our alleyway bricks, she created this artwork. It's actually papier-mâché, and you can see it's really quite authentic looking. So that was her contribution. So the last thing I want to show you, and I'm hoping this works, is following the talk I gave in September, with everybody saying, oh, there's so many places in York where you've got these bricks. It's very much part of York's heritage. And I think the council should do more about that, should actually recognise it, but that's another story. So we thought we'd start mapping them. And my colleague Catherine from our group has been working assiduously on this. So I'll show you what we've done. I'm going to go online, but this is, yeah, you can see what we've been doing. We talked about using various historic maps to do it on, but in the end it was much easier to use Google mapping because you can make it bigger or smaller and do things with it. So what we've done is try to mark where as many of the alleyways with the bricks in as possible and actually link to photographs. So what I'm hoping to do is use that link to go, oh Lord. See if it'll work. Yeah. Do I need to take that down a bit? That's it. Right, let me see if I can.
It's not on the screen, so.
Oh, I see. All right, yeah. Can you see that? And I'll see that's live now, and you can find it by going to that link from our website. And this now, I don't know whether I'll be able to. Now, normally I can make that bigger. Oh yes. It's not going bigger for some reason. Maybe I use that.
It's not sharing, so.
Oh, is it not? Oh, that looks like it, doesn't it? Yeah.
Nope. Missed it again.
So what we did was we put a plea out on social media for people to tell us about scoria bricks in their area. But what we really wanted people to do is photograph them and mark them on a map, because there's no way that just 2 or 3 of us could go out to do all that. So we need the contributions from people. And we've had quite a lot, particularly Acomb, Holgate, Lehman Road. Catherine's done a ton. I've done, sorry.
Yeah.
But I can't see it on there.
Yeah, no, one or the other.
I must see. Oh, so how do I manipulate it when I want to make it bigger, basically, and go in? Can we focus on Holgate, perhaps? Down a bit, down. There's Murray Street and Lindy Street. If you go to one of those red dots there and click on it, and then click on the picture. Yeah, you see what we've done. We've been able to link the extent on the map with a picture, and we've done as many of those as we can. So it's quite useful. And then perhaps go back again. There's a lot more in Holgate up there, and you can have a look at this yourself at home, obviously. Oh, those, yeah, those are a different kind, aren't they? Again, if you go to the picture, you'll see the bigger version. Yes, again, they're square bricks. So for every area that we've found already, we've done this linking. So go back again. But what we'll find, and I mean, without going into all of them, yeah, but there's tons. And sometimes they're gutters, and we've tried to colour code them. Sometimes they're gutters rather than alleyways. But there's, if we go back in, sorry, go back out. And out, yeah, and out again. You can see how many there are really. In all of the older parts of York, obviously not in the sort of new developments, but there are tons, and we're trying to expand that as far as possible. So anybody who's got any ideas as to where they are in your neighbourhood, do have a look and see if they're on our map. And you can see the link on our website. And what we need is a little indication of where they are, and also a photograph. So where am I? I think, oh, shall we go to the last slide perhaps? So I need to go out of the web. That's it. That's our website address, and that's our email address as well. So I hope you found that interesting, but I'm perfectly happy to answer questions to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Yes, Catherine.
Yes, and they don't want any flooding to go in.
For the benefit of those on Zoom,
Yeah.
Catherine's asking why some have a central gully, and they're actually later designed to have a central gully down some of the wider alleyways.
Yes, obviously for drainage. There are, definitely. It's such a pity that quite a number have been spoilt by either digging up or by weeds, really. But I noticed that some people, they let us know that people who lived around a back alley were making it their business to clear the weeds because they looked such a mess.
Andrew Scott.
Yeah, the slide you showed us relating to the page, the notice about suggested that it was selling geographical monopolies to suppliers. We talked about the areas between the
That's
ironworks.
Yes.
So I wonder if you've looked to discover who the supplier was in Europe, whether there was one license who was particularly active and successful in selling to the city. I'd like to explain why there's so many here. That's a characteristic of York.
I've always assumed, I mean, the geographical thing was to do with the ironmasters rather than the sort of intermediaries, I think, wasn't it? He was.
No, he was selling. What I took to say was that he was selling a license to be a supplier. Right.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, one of the problems I've had is trying to find any records of the company. And when you go on to Teesside Archives, there's only one reference to him, and it's to do with selling the property in their offices in Albert Road in Middlesbrough in 1913. So I haven't yet, I mean, I think the answer probably is that I or somebody needs to go to our archives and just have a look what the minutes are saying as to where we're getting them from and how many, because I've just found one record which was in the press. That was the only one, 1884. But presumably the council had to buy loads, and I assume those records will be in the Streets and Buildings
Streets and Buildings Committee
Yeah.
minutes, yes, about the geographical spread. But as to the date, the earliest is about 1882, because there were huge swathes being rebuilt, as you know, with Newton Terrace and the former city jail. That site was cleared in one lot in 1882, and they actually laid the scoria bricks before the houses even went up.
Oh, did they?
And they did the same in Holgate with the bottom of Murray Street. Indeed, one of the images that's turned up in the Hugh Murray archive is a very faint image looking across the bottom of what's now Lindley Street towards the new Methodist chapel at Holgate. And it's all neatly laid out with scoria bricks with no buildings in sight.
Because it was cheap and quick and effective, effective really. Yeah, there's a lot more work to be done. It's a matter of who does it.
I mean, well, obviously, my interest with the railway, it may have something to do with the railway, the transportation. I mean, from Dorman Longs down to York, Darlington. That's you know, even with a freight train, that's about 45, 50 minutes.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
How do you get flares on them? Because the brick itself is matte, isn't it? And
No, well, yeah, I mean, to be fair, I did put a bit of plein air varnish on here just to make it stand out. But when you look at the bricks in the alleyways, they are quite glazed. There has a natural glaze to the finish.
how do you get that when they natural?
Well, I assume it's the bottom of the mould,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it's a releasing agent in the bottom of the mould. You have to put something in to allow the cooled material to pop out, because it's not tapered, it's square. So you'd have to actually get it physically out of the mold by tipping it upside down. You'd need some, even if it's things like silica, something like that, you know, glass, like talcum as a kind of releasing agent. It has also become
Salt.
Yeah.
Salt that they put in there.
I don't know, because I haven't been
Yeah.
able to find out much more about that process.
Yeah. I think it'd be salt.
Mm.
Because it gets all the salt glaze drainage and everything else all was the same
Right.
thing. And salt was thrown into the kiln.
Yeah.
Which gives them a smooth, shiny.
all basically
weatherproof surface. And
Yeah.
it was the same.
all moulding processes need some sort of releasing agent, whether it's a plastic mold or a steel mold or an iron mold or a pseudo stone mold. It needs a releasing agent of some kind, and that will, like a cheese rind, cook onto the outside skin, and that's what makes them extremely durable. But it's glass, silica. It's effectively glass on the outside, which explains why they're so slippery. Yes, bits do disappear, but occasionally, of course, you notice where tarmac is now breaking up with our beloved potholes. You'll notice some of the cesses in the roads, the gutters, are now starting to show up, whether with square scoria bricks or the hexagonal scoria bricks. They're starting to re-emerge after about 80 years of being buried under tarmac. So that's one benefit of the breakup of our streets. Any more questions? Yeah, Jonathan.
Very good. This seems to me, I think that understanding urban birth, this seems to be a measure of that 1880s to 1914, that sort of what we've got, I call the ported terrace house and the open to the street terrace house, which are very standard designs across York. It almost seems to be that this is associated also with the brick.
Yeah.
And I mean, does it stop after the First World War? Would you move to that either council estates or that sort of 1930s semis? They don't seem to use them.
They don't seem to have them. No,
No.
It's difficult to be precise without looking more into the records, and that's quite a long-term project, really. But this is why I feel the council should actually take note of these bricks, that they are part of the heritage of the building at that period.
And perhaps admit they've got a supply. This is very good to know. Graham, any from the chat?
Yes, one of them is Steve, the official information in the book will maybe
Sandra Garside Neville, our archivist. When will you publish this in your
I'm
story?
going to say, well, I actually wrote a blog post about it. I understand I'm not allowed to reproduce it in York Historian if we've already put a blog post about it.
Have a chat with Sandra. Yes.
Yeah,
But-
but I mean, there's
yeah.
so much, we do need to have it down, yes.
Kurt.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, if the person has to find out whether they've been used further afield and not just in York, anywhere else in Yorkshire.
Kurt's asking if they've been used further afield.
Yes, there's a lot, Darlington, the North East, Newcastle, Edinburgh, all over the world. It's an important.
I shall drop an email to Richard Taylor, former city archivist, he now lives in Darlington, and he's an old mate. I think he owes me one, so I shall drop him a line and see if he can photograph some.
When asking the question 2 years ago,
Sounded like Richard, yeah.
Just an observation, I noticed last night, I obviously found it all we saw because the retail one, £36 a square yard.
£36 a square yard on eBay. Oh no, I know, I'm in the 21st century. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's something, I think Jonathan touched on it, about the sort of certain suburbs where you find them are the burgeoning artisans and middle classes, you know, and the period again, 1880s, it's that huge housing boom, post 1870s and the coming of the railway. And I think that there's got to be a link with the railway somewhere. I think, you know, the way he's moved about and the equipment's moved about, yeah, now it's brought in. And of course, it would require special wagons because it's yes, they're strong, but it's brittle. It's like carrying glass. So potential for breakage. They have to have special barrier wagons and things like that.
But they aren't brittle, though, those, are they?
Well, no, they can be broken with a sharp blow, you know, the lump hammer. I'm not going to demonstrate because I've only got a stick, but yeah.
Can I come back to the thought on?
Yeah.
Because I haven't actually looked into myself, it's something I'm interested in do at some point. But the role of building regulations, I think certainly the 1870s was really great building regulations. So the style of, and that's this two style of houses we have built. I think the result from building regulations. And I wonder, it might be interesting to know whether actually the use of the bricks was prescribed within building regulations.
Was that the bylaws or
Well, building by
the 1869, was it? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Old drains.
Yeah.
They seem to establish, again, I don't know anything about this, but they seem to establish the style of the house. And so that is the acceptable style of the houses and the layouts. And I just wondered whether, you know, they also stipulated that the back alleys should be laid out with these bricks.
Well, one of the key drivers was the fact they were cheap. But yeah, I think the answer is to spend a lot of time looking through the committee minutes and seeing how the decisions were reached.
The useful thing is the committee minutes from the 1870s are repeated verbatim in the York Herald, column after column after column.
Well, I think I must have put York scoria bricks into the newspaper archive, and I found very little from York. So maybe that indicates
it's going to be a case of searching street by street. Yes, on those long winter nights, looking down. Because the trouble with the newspaper archive is you can look for a maximum of 2 keywords before it goes mad. And they use a sort of search engine, which if you put more than 2 or 3 words in, it actually cuts the search parameters down by just say York. So if you put alleyway York, then of course you get everything done, every alleyway done. Paving is another one. Paving is a useful one in the minutes, 1970s, 1980s. Because it also gives the date of the streets.
Yeah, I mean, I would put scoria, but I suppose they might not necessarily have been known as scoria. No. Yeah.
They would probably, well, they wouldn't call them slag paviers, but they'd call them paviers.
Yeah.
Which of course refers to the person who lays them as well. Which doesn't have. So again, it's the trick. Sometimes you've got to just sit there and just go through a huge article and just carefully read it through, transcribe it, You know, like the first meeting of YAYAS in 1842, 11,000 words, yes. Sorry. But yeah, you have to, the minutes are repeated verbatim. We've done it because Rosemary and I, in the latest York Historian, with the fire research, we found that the council minutes are repeated verbatim. It's like a Rosetta Stone moment. They're repeated in the York Herald, particularly the York Herald. So it's a pretty safe bet if you have to council minutes
That go on for then.
until about 1883.
So I will check that and see if I can find something. But it
It's
might
quite tedious, yes. But if you have a tedious nature like me,
Yeah.
Graham, be more from the,
It's Ross Batchelor.
yeah.
It says a short section of road first lane adjacent to section of Park Road, runs into the road, and dated to 1874. Story of bricks is that.
So what Ros Batchelor has said via Zoom is that Park Grove Terrace, South Huntington Road, is dated to 1874, and that's got scoria bricks. That pushes the date well back.
that is interesting.
That could be the earliest. That and Lehman Road would be the earliest so far. So we're looking at about 10, 12 years before they actually stop laying. Any more questions? Right. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you in 4 weeks' time for Ian's talk on the transition from hotels to railways and York as a market town to a commercial town. How about that now, couldn't we? York as a lovely market town to a tourist town. Yes. Thank you, everybody. Have a safe journey home. Do pay a visit to the bookstore before you leave, but thanks, everyone. Good night. Cheers.